Nuclear War Survival Skills, Chapter 5, Shelter the Greatest Need, continued, page 51. Dust and heated air produced at overpressure ranges as low as 3 or 4 psi. However, calculations indicate that the large surface bursts most likely to endanger Americans would not result in the occupants of small, open shelters being burned by these effects, except at somewhat higher overpressures. Protection is simple against the heated dust and very hot air that may be blown into an open shelter by the blast. When expecting an attack, occupants of an open shelter should keep towels or other cloths in hand. When they see the bright light from an explosion, they should cover their heads and exposed skin. If time and materials are available, much better protection is given by making expedient blast doors. As described in Appendix D, when occupants see the very bright light from a large explosion miles away, they can close and secure such doors before the arrival of the blast wave several seconds later. Essential life support equipment. Shelters can be built to give excellent protection against all nuclear weapon effects, except in places within or very close to cratered areas. But most shelters would be of little use in areas of heavy fallout unless supplied with enough life support equipment to enable occupants to stay in the shelters until conditions outside become endurable. In heavy fallout areas, most high protection factor shelters would be crowded, except in cold weather. Most would need a ventilating pump to remove warmed air and bring in enough cooler outdoor air to maintain survivable temperature humidity conditions. Means for storing adequate water in another essential life support requirement. These and other essential essential or highly desirable life support needs are covered in following chapters. Basement shelters. The blast and fire effects of a massive all-out attack of the magnitude possible in 1987 would destroy or damage most American homes and other buildings and endanger the occupants of shelters inside them. Outside the blast and / or fire areas, the use of shelters inside buildings would not be nearly as hazardous. However, an enemy might also target some areas into which large numbers of urban Americans had evacuated before the attack, although such targeting is not believed to be included in Soviet strategy. Earth-covered expedient shelters in a blast area give better protection against injury from blast, fire, or fallout than do almost all basements. But during the more likely kinds of crisis threatening nuclear war, most urban Americans, including those who would evacuate into areas outside probable blast areas, probably would lack the tools, materials, space, determination, physical strength, or time required to build good expedient shelters that are separate from buildings and covered with earth. As a result, most unprepared urban citizens would have to use basements and other shelters in existing structures for want of better protection. Shelters in buildings, including basement shelters, have essentially the same requirements as expedient shelters. Adequate shielding against fallout radiation, strength, adequate ventilation, cooling, water, fallout radiation meters, food, hygiene, etc. Sketches and short descriptions of ways to improve the fallout protection afforded by home basements are to be found in widely distributed civil defense pamphlets, including two entitled In Time of Emergency and Protection in the Nuclear Age. In 1987, millions of copies of these pamphlets are stockpiled for possible distribution during a crisis. Unfortunately, most of such official instructions were written years ago when the deliverable megatonnage and the number of Soviet warheads were small fractions of what they are today. Official civil defense instructions now available to average Americans do not inform the reader as to what degree of protection against fallout radiation, which means what protection factor is given by the different types of do-it-yourself shelters pictured. There is no mention of dependable ways to provide adequate cooling, ventilation, an essential requirement if even a home basement is to be occupied by several families in warm or hot weather. Outdated or inadequate information is given about water, food, the improvement of shelter in one's home, and other survival essentials. No field-tested instructions at present are available to guide householders who may want to strengthen the floor over a home basement so that it can safely support 2 feet of shielding earth piled on it. In areas of heavy fallout, such strengthening often would be needed to safely support adequate overhead shielding especially if the house were to be jarred by a light shock from a distant explosion. In the following paragraphs, a way to greatly improve the fallout protection afforded by a typical home basement is outlined. If improved in this manner, a basement would provide excellent fallout protection for several families. First, earth should be placed on the floor above to a depth of about 1 foot. Earth can be carried efficiently by using sacks or pillowcases, using the techniques described in Chapter 8 for carrying water. If earth is not available because the ground is frozen. Page 52. Or because of the lack of digging tools. Other heavy materials, containers of water, heavy furniture, books, etc., should be placed on the floor above. These materials should weigh enough to produce a loading of about 90 pounds per square foot. About the same weight as earth, 1 foot thick. This initial loading of the floor joists causes them to carry some of the weight that otherwise would be supported by the posts that then are to be installed. Next, a horizontal beam is installed so as to support all of the floor joists under their centers. Figure 5.8 shows a beam and one of its supporting posts. Such a supporting beam, preferably, is made by nailing 3 2x6s securely together. 3 2x4s would serve quite well. Figure 5.8. Supporting beam and one of its posts installed to increase the load of shielding material that can be carried safely by the floor above a home basement. It shows the post in center of basement. It shows the existing floor joists. It shows this big supporting beam to be added. It says notch in end of joist that rests on wall. It shows brace boards pressed tight against the 4 walls. Obviously, this is the basement floor on the bottom. It shows an up-close picture of the joist and the beam and post. Cut posts to fit exactly under the beam. If trees at least 4 inches in diameter are not available, make posts by nailing boards together. Position the 2 outermost posts within 2 feet of the ends of the beam. Space the posts at even intervals, with each post under a floor joist. A post under every 3rd joist is ideal. This usually means a spacing between posts of about 4.5 feet. If the basement is 20 feet long, 5 posts are not enough. Nail each post to the beam and secure the bases of each with brace boards laid on the basement floor as illustrated. Finally, place a second 1-foot thick layer of earth on the floor above. If the basement windows are protected with boards, and if all but a part of one window and all the above ground parts of the basement walls are covered with earth 2 feet thick, the basement shelter will have a protection factor of several hundred against fallout radiation. Adequate ventilation and cooling should be assured by using a homemade air pump, a CAP, K-A-P, made and installed as described in Appendix B. Forced ventilation is especially necessary if more than one family occupies the basement in warm or hot weather. More work and materials are required to improve a home basement in this manner than are needed to build a covered trench shelter for one family. An earth-covered shelter separate from buildings will provide equally good protection against radiation, better protection against blast, and much better protection against fire. If a family cannot build a separate earth-covered shelter outdoors, often it would be advisable to make a very small shelter in the most protected corner of the basement. Such an indoor shelter should be of sit-up height, which means about 40 inches for tall people, and no wider than 3 feet. Its walls can readily be built of chairs, benches, boxes, and bureau drawers. Interior doors make an adequately strong roof. Expedient shielding materials to be placed on the roof, and the 2 exposed sides can be ordinary water containers and bureau drawers, boxes, and pillowcases filled with earth or other heavy materials. Or if heavy-duty plastic trash bags or 4-mil polyethylene film are available, make expedient water containers and use them for shielding. To do so, first line bureau drawers, boxes, pillowcases, trash cans, etc. with plastic. Place the lined containers in position to shield your shelter. Then, fill these expedient water containers with drinkable water. See Chapter 8. As demonstrated by hot weather occupancy tests of such very small indoor shelters, a small cap or other air pump must be operated to maintain a forced flow of air through such a crowded shelter to prevent intolerable temperature, humidity conditions. See Chapter 6 for ventilation cooling requirements, including the provision of an adequately large opening in each of end of a shelter. In some basements, a second small cap would be needed in hot weather to pump outdoor air through the basement. This cap could be operated by pulling. I'm going to end it right there.